one, go.
Good evening. Most of you are actually in BMDT and 289 How to Innovators Think class. One of the nice things about teaching the class is sort of staying in contact with people after they actually finish the class. That is actually certainly the case for Gus. Gus completed the class in the spring last year, and he knew that we sort of had a speaker series for the class. He actually contacted me and sort of had a suggestion, and I thought it was a fantastic idea to make that sort of a concept a lot of people are not familiar with, and yet a lot of us have to find ways to invest of the funds that we have. So Gus is going to do the introduction, so go ahead and turn it over to Gus.
Hey guys, I'm Gus Crawley. Like Roman said, I took the course before, sat where you all are sitting. I'm happy to be presenting Tone tonight. Let me get a show of hands. How many people heard of Bitcoin? Okay, and keep your hand up if you own some or have owned some. Okay, fair amount. So if you're not familiar with Tone, you certainly should be.
Well, how many of you are familiar with my work? Oh, wow. A lot of hands went up.
Well, without further ado,
awesome.
Let's let Tone take over.
All right, thank you. Really happy to be here. Thank you, Gus, for the invite. Thank you for having me in the classroom. And today's a little bit about myself. I started out in undergrad as a math major, science major. Started out as a high school teacher, actually. Wasn't a huge fan of that. Went and got my master's degree in financial engineering in order to get a job on Wall Street, which I eventually did about a year and a half later. I had to learn some skills on my own afterwards. I'll explain this in a second. I had to learn some skill after I got my master's in financial engineering because there was lots of things that they didn't actually teach me. One of the most important skill sets that helped me get a job on Wall Street was programming and being able to query a database. So SQL turned out to be one of the most important skill sets that I learned. Now, while I was looking for a job on Wall Street, I was actually a college adjunct professor with my master's degree. Needed a PhD to go further in that realm. So I was happy to get on Wall Street. My first job was Bear Stearns. And about a year and a half into that job, the financial crisis came of 2008. I'm sure you all heard about it. So Bear Stearns goes under. I end up transitioning to JP Morgan. And then I went and worked for a few other companies until leaving that space in 2015. After I left that space, I wanted to be a trader. My job on Wall Street was writing risk models or helping to write risk models. The quants with PhDs in computer programming and engineering were doing that. I just, my skill set wasn't that high up. But I had other skills that really helped a lot in that space. Everybody hears me okay in the back, right? I'm projecting my voice okay. One of the reasons why I quit was I always wanted to be a trader. I always was interested in trading. But as I was quitting, I was already becoming a big fan of Bitcoin. I got into Bitcoin in early 2013. In 2014, I started writing some articles, started getting some speaking gigs based on my like Wall Street background and expertise. And in 2015, when I quit to be a trader, I kept up with Bitcoin speaking engagements and slowly got into YouTube, which is, again, what's happening right now is I'm live streaming this on my YouTube channel. And that's the entrepreneurial side of things. Like, you can do more than one thing. Like, one of the ways that I got popular in the Bitcoin space was through the social media. I have a very popular Twitter. I'm getting a pretty popular YouTube channel. Initially, I was on other people's YouTube channels, and then hitting that record button. How many of you are on YouTube? Have your own YouTube channel? Anyone else? Really? It's a really good way to really start something that you're passionate about, and you get to see how many other people enjoy what you do and agree with you. So social media could be really, really good for that. It's very difficult to be on top of all the social media channels, but I concentrate on Twitter and YouTube, even though other types of social media are good. And my expertise slowly became Bitcoin and trading. And I want to do a quick presentation for you guys. This will take probably about a half an hour to 40 minutes. It gives you an understanding of why Bitcoin is important. I'm sure you all heard the words like blockchain, and blockchain is everything, but to me, it's Bitcoin. To me, Bitcoin is the one and only blockchain, just like we have one and only internet today. Everyone is basically using a single internet, and what are you doing with that internet to help your business, to help your social life, or to make your life easier? That's how I see Bitcoin. And this is a presentation. I'm slowly retiring as I spend a few years traveling the world doing this presentation at many places. And since we are live streaming, I'm actually going to turn the live stream over to the screen share, and then we'll get back to Q&A after that. All right. And just so you know, we only have about 400 live viewers right now, but we will get that up to over 1,000 as this goes on. That seems to be my average numbers. All right, so I do want to talk to you guys about Bitcoin, how it started, and the speculative bubble or bubbles that it has created so far over the years. Okay, here we go. So what you see right there is basically the entire history of the price of Bitcoin. It's a few, I mean, this slide is a few months old. We've gone up to that 19, 20,000 range for the price of one Bitcoin. We've now come down to 6,000 and bounced our way back to 9. So the last couple of months is not in this history. I guess I'll update it pretty soon. But I always like to start these presentations even before Bitcoin was created. And this was something that a Nobel Prize winning economist once said back in 1998 when Paul Krugman was asked by a magazine about the internet. And his reply was that he kind of backtracked afterwards, is that he didn't think the internet was going to amount to much. And by 2005, he expected the internet to have about the same impact as a fax machine. Of course, that's what one Nobel Prize winning economist had to say. Here's what another Nobel Prize winning economist had to say. So have a listen.
So I think that the internet is going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash, a method whereby on the
All right, what's going on here?
internet you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A. Way in which I can take a $20 bill and head it over to you, and there's no record of where it came from. And you may get that without knowing who I am. That kind of thing will develop on the internet, and that will make it even easier for people to use the internet. Of course, it has its negative stuff. It means that the gangsters, the people who are engaged in illegal transactions, will also have an easier way to carry on their business.
Sure, I'll play this again because it was skipping. I just want to, this is really important. That's why.
So I think that the internet is going to be one of the major forces.
Wow. It's at the same spot, too.
It's going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash, a method whereby on the internet internet, you can transfer funds from A to B. Without A knowing B or B knowing A.
Still worse the second time around.
The way in which I can take a $20 bill and hand it over to you, then there's no record of where it came from. And you may get that without knowing who I am. That kind of thing will develop on the internet, and that will make it even easier for people to use the internet. Of course, it has its negative side. It means that we get gangsters, the people who are engaged in illegal transactions will also have an easier way to carry on their business.
All right. So that was Milton Friedman as he was talking about what the internet is missing. And the way he saw it was that the government is in too much aspect of people's lives. And he felt that the internet would not be able to really break the grip of government controlling everything and provide more freedom to people until the internet actually had a mechanism, the cash style mechanism. Because there's a big difference between using cash and using credit cards or bank wires or debit cards. And that big difference is whoever is holding the cash is in possession of that cash. Now, this was something that the internet never had. If you think about it, how do you send messages over the internet? You send emails, you send pictures, you send text messages. Notice how everything you do on the internet, you're always sending a copy of a digital message. You're never losing the possession of the original. Anytime you email a Word document, not only do you have the copy of the email that's exactly the same, you have the copy of the Word document that's exactly the same. Same thing with file sharing, right? If you're downloading a music file, now two people have the exact same file. It was impossible to send any kind of digital data over the internet and you lose possession of that digital message. And that was the innovation that Satoshi, the anonymous creator of Bitcoin, whether it was one person or multiple people, that was the computer problem that was solved. It was known as the double spend problem, also known as the Byzantine generals problem in game theory, where if there are two generals looking to attack a city and they're on opposite sides of the city, how does one general know that the message he got from another general has not been tampered with? How does he know it's the original message that's being sent over as the only copy of that message? This was a long game theory problem in computers that some of the smartest people considered unsolvable until Bitcoin and the first blockchain actually solved that problem. And it was done with this decentralized mining structure, creating a financial incentive. And while this technology applies to the transfer of any data, what Satoshi realized, even as he was launching it, the most useful case of it is going to be using that data for money itself. Because once you send a digital message and you lose possession of that message, the message itself becomes quasi-money. And he also created it with a finite supply, which economists in the future will, of course, debate whether that was or wasn't a good thing. That's the inflationary currency, deflationary currency debate. I don't know how many of you have taken economics and you've already run into this debate in your classes. How many of you have? A few of you. All right. And so when Bitcoin first came on the scene, it came on the scene in 2009. And you can see how my price history begins in the middle of 2010. Because at first, no one really saw it as all that valuable. It was very new technology. People were sending each other thousands of Bitcoins. They were worthless. People were just experimenting with it until it started to get a price. In 2010, the famous, someone paid $20,000, 10,000 Bitcoin for a pair of pizzas. And that was like the first historic transaction. But the first time Bitcoin really got into the news was in very late 2010 with the WikiLeaks incident. How many of you are familiar with WikiLeaks, the website, and what it does? Okay, a majority of the room. So WikiLeaks publishes like classified government documents for the world to see in order to expose, again, some of the government's antics. And WikiLeaks was supported by people's donations. And then in late 2010, WikiLeaks was cut off from donations by Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal. So it became very difficult for WikiLeaks and its founder, Julian Assange, who's been hiding out in an Ecuadorian embassy in London because he's got, US is trying to extradite him. So it was suggested, so they got cut off from all types of funding by donations. And one of Bitcoin's core developers at the time, Amir Taki, suggested WikiLeaks needs to start accepting Bitcoin as a donation mechanism. Satoshi himself came out saying, hey, this is probably not a good idea. Bitcoin is too young. It's not ready for this yet. Not only is it not ready for that kind of media attention, technologically, it may not be ready to support large-scale transactions. So at the time, WikiLeaks did not accept Bitcoin right away. But the speculation of that incident was already driving the price up. The price made it all the way past $1, had a little bit of a correction. That's about a 25% correction. And then it seriously started rising in the summer of 2011. Now, one of the reasons that caused this big rise, and it was also publicized, was an incident out of New York, the state where I'm from, and our Senator Chuck Schumer. Who here has heard of the Silk Road website? Okay, raise your hands. So the Silk Road website was a gray market website that started accepting Bitcoin as the only currency. And it was a way to buy illicit substances on the internet, like drugs and fake IDs and some of the other things. Now, the government accused them of also doing things like guns and hitman for hire, though those were not really. The Silk Road did have some kind of standards. So there was a lot of things in that case that were not true. But in the summer of 2011, the Senator Chuck Schumer went on TV, and I wish I can play this video. It's not on YouTube, so I couldn't embed it like the Milton Friedman video. So Chuck Schumer went on TV screaming how this is so bad. You have this website called Silk Road where people can just buy drugs on the internet, but to access it, you have to use this decentralized browser called Tor, and then in order to pay for it, you have to use Bitcoin. It was probably the best tutorial on how to anonymously buy drugs on the internet a politician could have possibly given people. And this actually helped put Silk Road on the map. Sometimes one of the worst things you can do is make it public, and especially telling people how to go out and do something in the free market, because now they will go out and do it. So this seriously helped drive the price all the way to $30. And on the back end of this price spike, WikiLeaks also started accepting Bitcoin for donations. Now, of course, this was one of the biggest bubbles ever, because when a price goes from $1 to $30 and then crashed all the way to $2. Now, I'm using a logarithmic scale here, which is why the distance from $1 to $2 is about the same as the distance from $2 to $30. It's kind of what a logarithmic scale will do. Otherwise, this is a very different looking chart. So this was the biggest bubble in price Bitcoin ever saw. It was a drop of about 98% in value. But Bitcoin recovered, went to about $7. Now, the main news event of 2012 was a quiet time for Bitcoin. At the time, there was only one exchange out of Japan, but in 2012, China came on the scene. China started getting their exchanges for price discovery, and also in the summer of 2012, Bitcoin was featured on CCTV, which is the Chinese government channel, where that's watched by about 500 million people, which is greater than the population of America. So that really helped drive Bitcoin also up to $13.50, and yet another 50% correction in price. That leads us into 2013. Now, lots of things happened in 2013. So again, the most popular exchange was out of Japan. It was called Mt. Gox. Started out as a Magic the Gathering exchange. I think you guys are I think this is before your time. Anyone here like participated in oh, wow. Okay. I didn't, I never even, I was never even part of that crowd. It was never really my thing, but yeah, surprised it's still popular. But in hindsight, we know a lot of what happened during that time. For starters, Mt. Gox was running a fractional reserve. Mark Karpeles bought that exchange with 80,000 missing Bitcoin. Emails prove that. So he was already running, he already had a problem. And then he got hacked for approximately 250,000 additional Bitcoin, and they were running a fractional reserve. In hindsight, it looks like they were running this Willy bot that helped drive the price up. I'm not exactly sure why you want to drive the price up of an asset when you are short over 300,000 Bitcoin, and there weren't that much Bitcoin to go around at the time. Only about half the Bitcoin in existence were already out, but no one really knew who had them, and Satoshi wasn't exactly public and never spent any of his Bitcoin. Now, to me, the critical event of 2013 came out of Europe, and specifically Cyprus. Who remembers the Cyprus banking crisis of 2013? Oh, very good. And to me, this was a huge event. This was the event that got me, like as busy as I was, I knew about Bitcoin in 2011 because of the WikiLeaks case. The Silk Road use case wasn't really my interest, but the WikiLeaks case was. And that's what I heard about it. I Googled it in 2010, saw a lot of mining stuff. Again, I was busy with my financial job, so didn't really interest me. But this incident really got me, kind of off my ass and go out and buy some Bitcoin, because I was also thinking, hey, if this happened in Cyprus, this can happen anywhere. This can happen in America. This can happen in other countries. So basically, over the weekend, and these things are always on the weekend, Cyprus, which is a European country on the euro, it is a little tiny island, they shut down all bank accounts, and they decided to tax every single bank account for 6.75%. And if you had over 100,000 euros, they were going to tax you 10%. Now, the end result was that 47.5% of your bank account got confiscated above 10,000 euros. So if you had 200,000 euros in the bank in Cyprus, you just lost 50,000 euros. They just took that away from you, okay? So this was a straight-up case of government confiscating people's money. And this is something that kind of happens throughout history if you become a historian of economics and how regimes change and what the government does when they run into financial trouble. Now, of course, this was under the pretense that Russians and other countries are using Cyprus to hold their laundered money from illicit activity. And that's what allowed them to do this blanket money grab, basically by the European Union. Again, this is a phenomenon throughout history, which I may not fully get to in this presentation. And this really bothered me, and I wanted to find an alternative. Okay, is there an alternative where you can store your wealth, no matter how you earned it. But in my case at the time, hey, I'm earning my money legally. I have a really good salary on Wall Street. What happens when they just decide to confiscate my money? What's my alternative? Okay, because gold isn't exactly convenient. It also hasn't gone up in price at all. And gold was still going down and hit its bubble in 2011 and was still decreasing. So this seemed like a good alternative. And that helped drive the price from about $10 all the way to $250 per one Bitcoin. And I was buying right into this bubble, me being the financial expert, and then I watched my investment fall 75% in value, which was very, very fun to watch. But I got into Bitcoin for a longer horizon, so I still believed in its fundamental properties, which we will get to in this presentation. It continued stagnating until October 1st, 2013. Then there was this one-day crash from about $120 to $80 on October 1st. That was the day the Feds finally shut down Silk Road. Now, they all high-fived themselves that they shut down Silk Road, but if you guys remember the Napster story, you shut down Napster, you just create a dozen less safe alternatives where now people are still downloading their music in a very inconvenient way, plus getting a bunch of viruses. Okay, that's when I was in college. That was an interesting time because colleges were just getting like off of what do you call it, dial-up internet onto Ethernet, like high-speed internet, and like 90% of all traffic in the university campuses was file sharing and file downloading of music. And most colleges at the time were like banning like all of this bandwidth. Like your college would, like people were actually choosing colleges based on whether you could download music or not at the time. That was a very interesting time when certain colleges were banning any kind of high-speed downloading of music, MP3s. It was very interesting. And they shut it down. I remember that day very clearly because when you first get into Bitcoin, you just don't shut up and you want to tell everybody about it till they're pretty much sick of you. And then you stop. And now it's the opposite. Now everyone is calling me, asking me about it. And I really don't want to talk to them at this point. I should have listened to me 4 years ago. And now I'm really, really busy because now it's trying to do it for the media to reach mass people. And you tell them, hey, why don't you just watch my YouTube channel like everybody else? So at the time, everyone at my job knew, my love affair with Bitcoin. And the first thing that happened that morning when I'm sitting at my desk, one of my coworkers runs up to me laughing, goes, ha, 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 Silk Road got shut down. What are you going to do with your Bitcoins now? That's exactly what he said. And he knew I never really participated in the Silk Road, but it was just, that was pretty much the big use case at the time that made it popular. And yet, that caused a low in the price of Bitcoin, and it shot up all the way to $1,200. Now, a couple of things along the way, one of them being there were Senate hearings, very similar to the Senate hearings that just very recently took place, where the senators still seemed kind of curious about Bitcoin and the technology and trying to have a little bit of an open mind like the internet. Let's let it run a little bit and see what happens. It might be actually good for the economy. Though the money laundering hearings a few months earlier were not so kind to the world of cryptocurrency. So we'll see which way we're going to go. And the Japanese exchange implodes. That was the Mt. Gox incident. The US exchanges are closing down for regulatory reasons, but the Chinese exchanges start to go strong. So that was pretty much the run-up from 2010 all the way into the end of 2013. And here comes the nice long bear market. Bitcoin hit a bear market that lasted for just over 1 year, and then stagnated for an additional 9 months. And several things were taking place. First of all, lots of people were quitting their jobs, starting Bitcoin businesses, and when the price went down this much, a lot of them got into trouble. And most of the businesses that opened up in 2015 at the lows have done extremely well. And we will see how high this goes, though clearly we topped at 20,000. And let's see how long it takes for us to get back there. So when a bubble pops, it always tends to pop and the price comes down in a very similar manner. Of course, you don't realize it till it's too late, but Bitcoin is the asset in the backdrop in blue. Can everybody see the screen okay? I know we have like a lot of lights. Everyone's okay with the screen? All right. Or maybe we can get the lights if that's simple. I don't know if that's simple or not. Oh, much better. Should have done that from the beginning. Yeah. All right, don't fall asleep. It's a night class, not an 8 a.m. class. All right, so here's the bubble top, and Bitcoin is in blue, and now it's on a linear scale. It doesn't go all the way to 20,000, or this would be very, very skewed. So it's a bit of an old picture. So this is that bubble to 250, and this is the bubble. This is the bubble to 1200, and the backdrop asset is silver. And you can see, like with my arrows, how it falls in a very similar fashion. You get these secondary tops, you form this base, and you go up one more time, and then you fall quickly, making this, it's called capitulation in the world of trading, when you think that it's fallen enough, and then you get this sharp crash down, just completely demoralizing your upward position. Then again, you go up one more time, and you still have more lows to make. And they really fell in a similar fashion. Silver was leading the charge, and then Bitcoin started to lead. And now that Bitcoin has fully turned around and is going up, you also see silver and gold are starting to go up once again. So it's nice they're correlated, but Bitcoin seems to move a lot faster, which makes sense because Bitcoin is almost instant compared to trying to move physical gold and silver. And this is the typical bubble chart. I'm sure you guys seen this before in your financial classes, maybe not. I actually hate the way this chart is drawn because to me, this is not a bull trap. This is a great time to buy as long as you can realize and sell here. This area here, this return to normal, that's the bull trap. This is where a lot of people buy thinking you're going back to new highs. And in reality, that's when capitulation happens and you start to fall. So where is Bitcoin on this chart? Well, right at the moment, we're coming off of here. We already hit this point when we fell from 20,000 down to, we fell from 20,000 down to about 10. Then we went back to 18, and now we're kind of down here. So it's hard to say whether this point has or hasn't happened yet. Now, in reality, this has repeated with Bitcoin time after time. So we'll probably, I'm expecting another bubble to a higher high, probably in about a year or two. A little hard to time at the moment because I'm not sure if we have fully bottomed yet at 6,000 in price. So a couple of other things on this. Let me actually, hold on a second. I'll skip that. So yeah, I don't want to back up too much. So you can see right here. So I mean, economics 101, right? Like, what's the price of something? Well, it's supply and demand, right? Again, if you guys have taken an economics class, everything is based on supply and demand. So, but in Bitcoin, what is supply and what is demand, right? We have supply becomes very tricky because we know that Bitcoin is still being mined. We have 12.5 Bitcoins being created every 10 minutes on average. Now, that's down from 25 Bitcoins every 10 minutes, and that was down from 50 Bitcoins every 10 minutes. Soon it's going to get cut in half again. Around early 2020, the production of Bitcoin is going to get cut again. So at the moment, about 80% of all Bitcoin has been created. And in fact, more than that, like 84% or something like that of all Bitcoin has been created. So that's a predictable supply. What people don't realize is that merchant selling is also part of the supply curve. So if you are going to use your Bitcoin in commerce and you're using it with a merchant that immediately sells that Bitcoin for local fiat money in the bank, that adds to selling pressure of Bitcoin, causing potential drop in prices. And in 2014, I was involved in a lot of these arguments. That was at a time when PayPal had some articles saying they were thinking of integrating Bitcoin, which I saw as being very, very bad for the price of Bitcoin. Because if PayPal integrates it, then all of these people with Bitcoin can use it almost anywhere, and none of these merchants have any interest in holding on to that Bitcoin. So it immediately gets sold on the open market, causing more selling pressure. And I was in lots of debates in that realm. I'll skip that. Now let's talk about the demand side of the equation. And it's interesting. I wrote this article. It got published in Cointelegraph, one of the publications. But then I republished it on my own website, the top use cases for Bitcoin. And I have to be careful where I show this in some countries, where I kind of have to talk about this very, very carefully. Because the idea of Bitcoin, Satoshi knew exactly what he was creating. That's why he never revealed himself and he stayed invisible. He realized right away that Bitcoin is for payments the government says you can't make. It's an alternative to cash on the internet. So the most likely use cases are going to be those use cases that get censored by the government. Now, while you can look at this list and cringe a little bit, what you have to realize is that every use case on this list, from contributing to organizations like WikiLeaks, purchasing illicit products like narcotics on the internet, gambling, purchasing services, this mostly applies to escort services and prostitution. A lot of these things are legal in many of other first world countries. Portugal has legalized all drugs. You are now watching marijuana being legalized here in the US. Other countries have their red light districts. Gambling is legal in most countries. Same thing, no one should tell you which political organizations you should be allowed to donate your money to. You should have freedom on that. Again, tax evasion. Some jurisdictions have very little taxes. I just came from Singapore, where there's almost no taxes on your income. Puerto Rico is a region here in the US that has no taxes as well. And lots of people are moving to Puerto Rico and try to help build their economy. And my most important use case is transferring value cross-border, and that's what I'm going to finish off with this presentation. So there are other use cases that Bitcoin is really popular for that I did not put on this list, one of them being crypto locker. How many of you have heard of crypto locker? Okay, where someone encrypts your computer and demands ransom in Bitcoin in order to give you the decryption password so you can use your computer again. Hospitals have been attacked. Police stations have been attacked. Now, I see that more as a complete illegal activity because that's the kind of thing that's universally, deemed immoral and or illegal. Everything on this list is debatable from a moral perspective. That's why I have it as a very good use case. Other cases where Bitcoin is unfortunately becoming popular is in kidnapping. Because again, we've already had a couple of instances of that because now you can demand ransom anonymously and you don't have to be there in person to pick up the ransom amount, or I'm not sending someone in person. Now, of course, Bitcoin is still not as anonymous as people think. These things can be tracked. So this is just something that society, How's my volume? I think it's good. This is just something that society will have to find a way to work with, okay? But, you know, we have to live through it, but it shouldn't stop the technology. Like when people bring up these things to me, I always say, I bet you the first people to invest in buying a car were bank robbers, because they can get away from the cops on horses much faster, right, in a car. So now police have to also go out and get cars. So a lot of technology gets adopted by the gray market first. I was in high school when AOL Instant Messenger came out, right? Revolutionized messages. Oh my God, I'm talking to someone from Australia. That's never been done before, right? And at the time, all we heard was, oh my God, don't talk to strangers on the internet. Next thing you're gonna know, you know, they might pull up in their car and you're gonna get into their car. And now that's like the top use case, right? You're using the instant messenger to literally have strangers pick you up in their car. While at the time, that was the worst thing possible. And now we have Uber, right? So this is how technology evolves. And my use case for using Bitcoin to transfer value cross-border is really important. The first time I ever gave this presentation, I remember it clearly. It was in February of 2015. It was in Mexico. And I remember saying, you will see Bitcoin be a serious player once the Greek banks shut down. And that happened about 4 months later. And I expected a lot more fallout from Europe, because I just don't believe the European currency, the euro, is sustainable. There's lots of problems in the euro. Each country on the euro has its completely different economy with completely different incentives for the currency, yet they're all on the same currency. And after Greece banks shut down, I always kept saying, when Italian banks shut down and they have huge banking crisis in Italy, and that still hasn't happened. And now it's been about almost 3 years since I've been saying it. I actually gave this presentation in Italy about 6 months ago. And when I said that, guys, I have no idea how your banks are still functional. And the entire room agreed with me, because they also have no idea how their banks are still functional, yet they are. So I'm still expecting big fallout out of Europe. I guess I credit Martin Armstrong, one of the economists and economic historians that I followed for years. He explains it very well. The two biggest problems with the euro being, one, when they created the euro, they kind of wanted it to be like when the US created the dollar and combined the states into one national currency. The US consolidated the debts of all the countries into one federal debt. Europe did not do that when they created the euro, and that's creating lots of pressure on their currency. In addition, he explains it that a huge problem with the European currency is that, unlike in the US, everyone had to learn a common language and have a common culture. And in the US, everybody, like, US was the melting pot. Everyone married each other because everyone had a common language. If you came to the US from Europe or anywhere else, lots of intermarriages. And in Europe, the Italians don't really marry the Germans. You know, the French don't really marry the Italians. Each country is completely independent. And one of the barriers is a common language, even though you go to a country like Switzerland and everyone speaks 4 languages. Italian, German, English, and their own language. And Spain and Portugal are having their own financial problems. And so is France. And I don't know how long Germany is going to be able to prop up the euro. So I've been expecting for those problems. And when these economics problems hit, and they historically have hit Europe many times, hence the 2 world wars, people just have to get up and move. And they take what's valuable to them and they move to other jurisdictions and other countries. This happens all over the world. We saw this happen, again, like the hyperinflation of Zimbabwe from the 90s. The new government came in, took away land from the rich people. Most of them happened to be white. started giving that land to the, original people of Zimbabwe. All the entrepreneurs left. They didn't want to stay there anymore. They have no property rights. So once all the entrepreneurs leave, they were the job creators, and there's loss of faith in the government, and the government has no choice but to print money, leading to hyperinflation. Venezuela is having similar problems now. Hyperinflation is not a currency event, it's a political event. People lose faith in your government, and your currency just collapses. People have been saying about America, all this money printing is going to lead to hyperinflation. Meanwhile, the dollar continued to strengthen. It's just weakening over the last 6 months. I'm still expecting the dollar to continue to get stronger. I still think the US economy is doing well. I mean, Amazon, Apple, Google, Netflix, I mean, Tesla, those companies are doing incredibly well, and robots are coming for your jobs, guys. So my advice to you, no matter what your major is, you may want to be a computer science minor. You really want that skill set, no matter what you're doing. I don't care if your major is art history. You may want to pick up a computer science minor. You're going to realize how important that skill is in any in whatever you're going to do in the future, because everything is going to be a part of it. So what else causes the breakup and the eventual collapse of superpowers and first world leaders? One of the biggest problems throughout history has been taxes. And I first noticed this. I mean, I was already starting to travel the moment I started making money. Love traveling. And I was an early Airbnb user from the beginning. And in the summer of, when was this tweet? August 10th, I believe it was 2015. Now I wish Twitter had years on here. I remember the first time I booked an Airbnb, and it just felt different. I'm like, this shouldn't cost me this much. And that was the first time that I saw all these taxes show up. Because I've been using Airbnb for over a year at this point. One of the great things that made Airbnb competitive is that they avoided any kind of a tax. Like, your hotels are more expensive because of the hospitality tax. If you ever book a flight, take a look at how much your flight costs versus how much taxes are in those flights. About half the price of your airline ticket is taxes. Okay, and the similar thing happens in hotels. And all of a sudden, I'm booking an Airbnb, and the price of my Airbnb just went up about 25%, 25%. And again, that like bothered me. I'm like, wow, this is not going to be as competitive against hotels anymore. So that was unfortunate. You also are seeing like some states putting in exit tax to leave that state. Now, another interesting thing happened when I saw these taxes show up on Airbnb, and this is in 2015. All of you put this little check mark and hit agree on everything you pull up on the internet that says terms of service. You have to agree to an agreement. How many of you ever read those documents? I always have one hand up. I think I saw a hand back there, right? One hand. You still have time to go to school and read all those documents? What I noticed was that little scroll bar was a little too small, right? So what do? I click right in there. I do Control-A, Control-C, Control-V. Yes, I use Windows. And pasted that whole thing into Microsoft Word, and here's what came out. 55 pages and 33,000 words. Now, this was back in 2015. I'm sure this document has probably doubled in size. That was in addition to the privacy policy that I also had to agree to. That one was smaller, so I didn't bother. And then you start taking a look at other famous documents in history, like the Declaration of Independence, only being 1,300 words, or the US Constitution with all of its amendments, only being 7,800 words. We kind of sort of still follow that. The funny one floating around the internet until I ran into the Airbnb one was the EU regulation on the sale of cabbage at 27,000 words. And I love the fact that Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper for Bitcoin was only 3,400 words as an 8-page readable document. And I strongly recommend you guys go on the internet and try to read this document. And that's one of the problems, right? Once these countries become somewhat socialized, the laws tend to get somewhat complicated. And this is one of the laws here in the US that passed about 2 years ago. Anyone want to take a guess at this beautiful piece of legislation that was 33,000 pages? Yep. That is the Obamacare, okay? So the joke that went around, nobody read Obamacare when they passed it. How can anyone read that? Yet someone had to write it. But yes, this is Obamacare printed out. And this is one of the problems. Laws begin to pass that are, A, unreadable and no one knows what's in it. And all of a sudden, everyone tends to be a criminal because you don't know what's in it. And the other one is, how do you enforce this? Like some of the laws that pass, how do you enforce the laws? And we're gonna, I mean, we can talk about that in Bitcoin, where the government was considering, like, if you're holding Bitcoin on your own, and that's the great thing about Bitcoin, is that for the first time in human history, you can own possession of an asset of value that is unconfiscatable if you're properly taking care of it. You can memorize the password in your head, and no one even has to know you own the Bitcoin. That has never happened before. Anything you've ever owned prior to Bitcoin can always be taken away from you by someone with a bigger gun until Bitcoin. And that's the greatest property of Bitcoin that people still haven't comprehended. Now, of course, the technology has to continue to stay decentralized, and it has to be stable. Bitcoin, I believe, is only the second piece of decentralized technology that has succeeded, the first one being file sharing with BitTorrent, where you're downloading pieces of files from other people's computers. And we'll see if there's another case of decentralization that succeeds. But so far, for me, it's only been BitTorrent and Bitcoin. And of course, the other property is what I'm discussing here, the ability to transfer that Bitcoin from any person to any other person directly with a censorship-resistant quality. There's nobody in the middle, and there's nobody that can stop that transaction. Bitcoin may not be anonymous, might not be quick, it may not be cheap, even though right now it's both quick and cheap, but that kind of fluctuates. And even if they know you're doing something, the fact that they cannot technologically stop you is a very powerful mechanism. So all these laws show up, and of course, some disclaimers are simpler than others. When the New York passed the BIT license, making it very difficult for New York residents and companies in New York to work with Bitcoin and the blockchain technology, Volturo, a company that lets you convert gold into Bitcoin and back very easily, decided to put their disclaimer. I confirm that I am not a resident of Iran, Syria, North Korea, or the state of New York in order to combat the New York BIT license. Because again, how do you enforce the law? When you tell me, me as a New York resident, I am not allowed to trade on Bitcoin exchanges, and they're completely ignoring the fact that VPNs exist. A VPN allows me to pay $10 a month for a piece of software on my computer that allows me to pretend that I'm anywhere in the world. I can choose my country. And my computer shows my ISP provider that, no, I'm actually in a different country. So how do you enforce a law that New York State residents cannot do something on the internet? Some laws are just unenforceable. Now, this was great. I was so happy I found this from Harvard Business Review. So another reason why Bitcoin becomes so important is there is this global push by governments to eliminate cash. And this article did a fantastic job explaining why. So there are basically three reasons why the governments want to eliminate cash. One of them is economic, in that without cash, it's impossible for a person to exit the banking system. So the government and the government economists can set any kind of monetary policy that they like. They can put negative interest rates on you. If the government thinks you should be spending more money, they can charge you a negative interest rate. So your money at the bank actually loses money to force you to spend more. But if the government put negative interest rates on, like Switzerland did, you have the option of going to the bank and taking the cash out, because you can put the cash in or under your mattress, and it will retain its value better than keeping that cash at the bank if they're charging you negative interest rates. So negative interest rates are very difficult to enforce if there is cash. Another reason is without cash, there's no such thing as a bank run. So all those pictures of the Great Depression or Greece from 2015, the only difference in those pictures was pretty much color. One are in black and white, one is in color. People line up down the block because you're only allowed to withdraw 20 euros from that ATM machine. Without cash, there's no bank run, there's no lines, there's no visual image of a financial crisis. That's a big deal. Human psychology goes a long way. And of course, the most important reason for eliminating cash is a government thinks that every single person is a tax evader. And the reason why we don't have a beautiful utopia of everyone living in harmony is because we're all cheating on our taxes, and they just don't have enough money, and we're not giving them enough time to do it for us. Now, of course, it's partially true in some regions of the world more than others. In India, for example, this study estimates that 30 to 45% of government GDP is missing because of the India cash economy and everyone using cash to transact. This might be the reason why India canceled their two biggest physical bills and replaced them by another large physical bill. Now, the largest physical bill in India is equivalent to about $5 US, but that's besides the point. Things are cheaper there. And they also did this graphic. What you see in blue is government's expenses to maintain a cash economy being cheap, and red means it costs the government a lot of money to maintain a cash economy. Yellow is kind of in between. And this graphic shows you which countries are technologically ready to eliminate that cash. So the three countries in the upper right-hand corner, Germany, France, and Belgium, are very technologically ready to eliminate cash, and they would benefit a lot because they're red dots. You can also see India being most to the right, which means they would benefit absolute most from having a cash, from eliminating their cash economy. Well, the government would benefit the most by eliminating the cash economy, but they're also all the way down. Well, not all the way, like Philippines, Egypt, Nigeria, and Indonesia are below them. But India is not technologically ready yet to eliminate cash, but they seem to be trying. And let's close out on what the government is trying to do to kind of stop people from using cash. In France, for example, if a French citizen is buying anything with 100 euros in cash, they now have to provide ID and identify themselves because, again, the governments want to eliminate the cash economy, which is great if you're a Bitcoin holder, because that's what Bitcoin is there to replace, as long as it can stay decentralized, which is its own technological challenge, or at least there's lots of actors trying to remove that decentralization for personal gain. Other countries like the US, this is a law of Louisiana that I'm having problems finding because I think they realized how stupid the bill was that passed, and they're kind of trying not to show it to people. So you can read it right here. A secondhand dealer shall not enter into any cash transaction in payment for the purchase of junk or used secondary property. So what does that mean? That means if you want to sell that bicycle for $20 in cash, you're breaking Louisiana law. You better take a credit card or a personal check or somehow KYC, know your customer, which is you have to know exactly who's buying it from you and that their cash was legal. So that's something silly that Louisiana did. And in Germany, what Germany is trying to do is they're trying to eliminate the market on, I guess, collectibles. So what they're saying is, and you can read it right here, this amendment not only aims to combat illicit traffic in cultural objects in Germany, but at limiting ways of funding of terror organizations that are more and more financed by illegal excavations at archaeological sites, as well as the illicit trade in cultural material. Now, think about this rationally, right? Like, how ridiculous is that, right? Like, they're actually blaming the fact that terrorist organizations are becoming archaeologists and digging at archaeological sites in order to finance their operations, okay? Now, they want to identify any person that has any collectible worth over 100 euros. So if you have a piece of art on your wall that's worth over 100 euros, you are supposed to report that to the government. Now, again, I'm sure of all the countries in the world, Germany is very familiar with what happens in times of stress. Because during World War II, World War I, I don't know if you've seen the old movies. I'm personally not a fan of war movies. I refuse to watch them. I don't like, contributing money for profit on, that time. But that's my personal choice. But what happened during that time? I mean, people built fake wine cellars behind the wall to hide their art. They bought, wine. They bought art. They bought old coins. They bought gold, and they hid it. They buried it. They buried it behind walls. And Europe is very familiar with this, in that people will hide their assets in whatever they will be able to sell or whatever they will be able to move across the border. And the idea is to eliminate that now. Also, it's for tax reasons, just like money in Cyprus banks was confiscated. The same thing, they can, if the government knows you have a $50,000 painting on your wall, they can pass a law saying, hey, that painting is very valuable. You need to pay, a tax for having that painting. So every year, just like, a tax on your real estate, every year, you owe us 3% of the market value of that painting in taxes if you want to hold on to that painting, or the government has a way to confiscate it. This is no different than you owning real estate, which you have to pay property taxes on. And this is what's happening right now. And when government starts to become overbearing, over-controlling, what happens to the population of that region? Well, the population says we had enough. They take what's valuable to them and they just leave. This is, again, thanks to Martin Armstrong for doing all the historical research. This is his view on the population of Rome and the way Rome fell. The population of Rome got to 1.5 million people in 400 AD. And then Rome kind of collapsed from within. Now, a bit of a similar thing is happening in first world nations now. Now, at the time, of course, Rome was policing the whole world. The US is kind of doing the same, but not nearly to the same extent. Now, Rome promised all of these pensions and all of these salaries and all of these medical benefits to its soldiers, and they kept devaluing the currency. They kept going back on those promises until eventually two things happened. One, the soldiers stopped protecting the city, and Rome started to fall. And two, the soldiers actually came back to the city of Rome and sacked their own city for what was owed to them. This is my worry here in the US. Everyone always talks about the national debt being 25 trillion. The national debt doesn't worry me. The government can always print some money to cancel the national debt. In addition, who's going to come to the US to collect on that debt? I mean, we're not being invaded anytime soon. That's not happening. But it's not the 25 trillion national debt that bothers me. It's the 120 to 140 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Same thing with Rome. This is the promises, the pensions, the healthcare benefits to all the government employees across the board. The teachers, the firemen, the policemen, and all the other government employees. There's many of them. Or contractors that get their money from government employees. And if that government check bounces, it's the people of this country that are going to be out in the streets. That's what worries me. When I go to a country like Vietnam, communist country, no one there depends on the government, right? If the government of Vietnam, the communist government disappears, nobody on the street would even care. Like what happened in Russia, right? Like it became capitalist. In a more socialist country like the EU, like here in the US, if that government check bounces, and I'm not talking about like the welfare check or the the SNAP program check. I'm talking about the pension benefits and the medical benefits to all the government employees. That becomes a problem. You already seen protests, of unions and things like that. That can get severely worse. And that creates a lot of trouble for a country. And that's how most countries end up turning the corner. And then people move to other countries where they can start those businesses. And you can see on that population chart, it drops and then it comes back like any bubble, and then it really, really collapses. And again, this is where Bitcoin becomes very useful because it's hard to move that gold. In the past, when you put your valuables in gold, you can just get up and leave. But now, hey, how are you going to move that gold? Metal detectors exist, right? So they can easily catch you moving that gold with a very large penalty. But you can move the Bitcoin in your head. And again, thank you, Satoshi, for giving us this asset that is unconfiscatable when properly handled. And here's two headlines from the same publication, TechCrunch, where in February of 2015, they write why Greece should not switch to Bitcoin. And then a few months after the Greek banking crisis of 2015, here's the same publication, Bitcoin provider Qubits aims to help Greeks move their money. That's pretty much it. When I do this presentation at other conferences, I talk about, that's actually me writing for Cointelegraph. I'm a trader, I'm a technical analyst, and I kind of talk about my price predictions, and I teach seminars teaching people how to be technical traders, how to analyze technical charts. But I'm not going to get into that today. And these were some of my tweets and calls for predictions of the price of Bitcoin. I got a lot of popularity for calling the price of Bitcoin correctly for the last few years. I've had my bad calls too. These were some of my better calls. There's a star right here when Bitcoin was falling, and I pointed out these points of support, with this being the biggest one. Then you can see a tweet here with me pointing with an arrow saying, hey, might be a good time to pick up Bitcoin on the dip, kind of like the shirt that I'm wearing. You always want to try to catch that dip. And you can see that's exactly what happened to the price of Bitcoin. And after that, it didn't really look back. Here's another example. I sent out this tweet based on technical analysis. Hey, this triangle statistically should break out to the upside, and the price of Bitcoin should go from 3,000 to 3,500 with ease. And you can kind of see what happened right after. There's that target. Hit it pretty quickly and kept going. Here's one more example of me sending a tweet. Hey, this is now or never bounce. If we don't bounce here, we got huge problems. And some prominent people with TV shows ended up taking that advice and were very, very thankful for it. So that's kind of what I do. I'm actually teaching one of my trading seminars here on Saturday. As I travel the world, do presentations like this, I have like 3 other presentations on different topics in similar style. But that's it for today, guys. We're gonna hopefully have some time left for Q&A on anything you like. So hope you enjoyed the presentation. You have a better understanding of why Bitcoin is so important to our world economy.
Do you have any questions? Anybody got any questions for Tom?
Quickly,
All right, give me 1 second here. We're gonna see if we get the live stream going. Let's see if the camera comes back. There it is. If you don't want to be on camera on YouTube, you may want to move to this side of the room. So here's your chance. Otherwise, you can find yourself on YouTube on my YouTube channel. Let me see here. Yep, that should cover about most of the class. And I'm going to slide over as well. And we'll take Q&A. Yeah, and if you ever get into live streaming, man, everyone complains about video quality, audio quality. Man, I got to get some like wireless microphones that are good. Am I on camera yet? You know what? I should stand. Why am I sitting? I'm not old. All right, are we good? Am I on camera? Barely. All right. No, let's do that. It's slow to react here. Yeah, I'm good here. All right. All right, let's take some questions.
Yeah. Hey, Tony, how are you?
Good.
Sorry. Yeah. So I recently watched your podcast or interview or debate with Richard Hart.
Yeah, that wasn't really a debate. We were on the same page mostly.
Oh, yeah, you are.
We were talking about the futures, me and Richard Hart, about the outcome of Wall Street having Bitcoin futures on the CME.
Yeah,
right, go on.
Lately, he also had a same podcast with Ivan on tech, and I was just surprised that he kind of switched 180 degrees when it comes to Bitcoin.
I know. So I've been dealing with this question way too much, to the point that I might, like, once I get back to New York next week, I'm going to try to get Richard Hart and we'll talk. People keep asking about him. Like, I just don't have the time to try to understand what other people are thinking. So I don't know why he got fed up and why he's switching to altcoins. Last time I spoke to him, he was a Bitcoin maximalist like myself. See, I don't believe that any other alternative to Bitcoin is going to survive for multiple reasons. The number one reason why I don't believe an alternative to Bitcoin is going to survive is because unlike what some are trying to tell you, that the wisdom of the crowd solves things, the wisdom of the crowd doesn't really solve anything. The smart experts tend to solve things. Like, you're not going to have a bunch of random people building a nuclear reactor for electricity to your town. You're going to outsource that to the nuclear engineers. Blockchains work the same way. Your blockchain is only going to be as good as the developers that are programming it. And I have not seen, like, the smartest guys are in Bitcoin. And if they can't solve it, then it's probably not going to get solved. That's where they are. So that's one reason. The other reason is, if all these alternatives are viable, then we want inflation. Then we want, like, free for all. And it doesn't make sense for everyone to have their own currency, right? Like, everyone wants to talk about these application tokens. I'm going to ICO. Well, you're either creating your own security, and then the SEC is going to get you for creating your own security, or you're just printing your own money. Now, if you're printing your own money, A, the government can get you, and B, that doesn't really work. You need some competitive currencies. But if every single person printed their own money, you can see the problem here, right? And the US had this problem. When Andrew Jackson in the 1830s eliminated the Second Federal Reserve Bank, every bank just started printing their own money. And no one around the country knew which money was legit and which money was counterfeit. It's a huge problem. That led to the creation of the Secret Service, whose first job it was to deal with counterfeit money. In fact, that's still the number one priority of the Secret Service. The second priority is protecting the president, though that one seems to be more important, right? But according to, like, the why we have Secret Service today, as far as I understand it, it was the number one rule was, hey, we got to solve the counterfeit money problem. So you really don't want every single company and every single person to be responsible for their own money printing, because that's going to get really out of control. Again, a blockchain, like, to me, a blockchain is proof of work. You need this mining structure burning electricity, you don't just get something for nothing. All of these projects that call themselves proof of stake, well, that's like inflation, right? You have something, so you earn more of it. And where's your security? Like, I believe that the mining and the burning of electricity to create Bitcoin is security for the coin. And if anyone else has another proof of work system, they're competing with each other. And it doesn't necessarily really make sense. So I do believe that we're going to have just one blockchain with a few test nets that could be viable if something bad happens. But if something bad happens, it will just set us all back. Like, for example, if the internet did something catastrophic, like, let's say, blow the global electric grid, the next 100 years would probably be without internet, right? Because no one is going to want to trust in this thing the second time around until a generation or two. So if the Bitcoin blockchain totally implodes, who would trust their life savings on another blockchain if Bitcoin couldn't get it right? So there's lots of factors that go through my brain as to why Bitcoin doesn't really have any competitors, and they're all going to be short-lived. With the most important one being some of the smartest people I've ever met. And there are lots of smart people working on Wall Street that could be coming over, because, I mean, I've met some genius programmers, because this is what Goldman Sachs does. They go find one of the smartest physicists that knows how to program, and they go, hey, listen, you don't want to build a spaceship that can take us to Mars in 3 weeks' time. You want to come and make $1 million a year programming financial derivatives, right? That's kind of what they do. So there are lots of smart people over there, and some of them have already started coming over, and they are programming on Bitcoin. All right, let's go here.
Also, thank you, as many people do, for traveling around the world for so many years. You could make a lot more money just doing your trading, but you miss some of the trades while you're flying from city to city. But and I enjoy your videos very much. If you haven't seen this, they're really great. And if anything's happening with the market, I'm video to find out.
Thank you. Thank you for enjoying my work.
I was pointing out I was actually seeing maybe my Rick Falcon.
Oh, Rick Falcon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't.
Breaking up, so I thought,
Okay, so I didn't watch that video. I mean, I haven't really had time to watch those guys. So was he happy that was Rick Falcon happy blockchain was breaking up, or was he saying this is a weakness for Bitcoin? Now this is very ironic. It's right. So this is very ironic. So the same people that were demonizing Bitcoin because of this company Blockstream, and I'll explain Blockstream in a second. So let me explain what Blockstream is. So Bitcoin core developers, one of the things that makes Bitcoin decentralized, that means no one's in charge. And these developers, you have developers programming the code. And it's a very difficult job, because you have to make sure that no backdoors and no severe bugs. I mean, we're talking about almost $1 trillion in market cap, or at least we were heading in that direction. You want to make sure that no bugs ruin the system. And so it's a hard job, and it's a decentralized job. Some of these developers are anonymous, even today. Most of them work for free. Over 500 people contribute. 100 of them contribute more so. About 10 to 15 of them are very, very important and very smart and do most of the work. And they spend most of that time reviewing code, making sure there's no bugs, making sure there's testing. And a couple of organizations formed, one of them being Blockstream. So it was out of San Francisco. The CEO of the company is Adam Back, who was credited in the Satoshi white paper. He tried developing this way before and couldn't get that final part done that Satoshi did with mining. And they got funding, and one of the companies that funded them was a financial company called AXA. I believe it's a French company. Don't hold me to that. And lots of conspiracy theories around it. The CEO of that company was the chairman of the Bilderberg Group, which is a a conference where all the world leaders and the financial leaders get together in secret and all this other insanity, right? So, and all this double speak. Anybody familiar where the term double speak came from? Got one. It's from the book 1984 by George Orwell. Very good book, strongly recommended. I mean, I don't read much, but I prefer it on film. That's just my personal preference. I can read infinite amount of blogs, but like it's hard for me to sit down and read a book. Always had that problem, even when I was going through my universities. But I do recommend two of my favorite pieces of literature were both from George Orwell, 1984, and Animal Farm. Animal Farm is nice and short. Check that out. Great, great book. So all this double speak. So it's like people are happy that Wall Street is getting into crypto and Bitcoin, yet they're upset that one of the leading companies that pays these developers to work on Bitcoin got funding from a financial company, right? So they started accusing Blockstream control of Bitcoin, even though they were only paying like 3 or 4 developers out of hundreds of developers, and there are other similar organizations that were self-funded that have even more top developers that they're supporting. And now one of those leading developers, one of the top 2 out of 5, that was the CTO of Blockstream, decided to go on his own, probably got sick of wasting his time dealing with all of the criticism. So he's like, I can still do everything what I'm doing, only outside that company, so I don't have to deal with the criticism. So now the company is kind of breaking up, mostly because of pressure, even though I didn't think they were doing anything wrong. It was basically just an office for these guys to collaborate better. So it's kind of breaking up. So they should be, this was what they were accusing them for. Now they're breaking up, and yet now they're using that again to fuel their altcoin, which I think is a scam coin, known as Bcash. And now they're using, so everything they wanted is happening, and now they're using that. Everything they wanted before they split is now happening, and yet they're still, like, now they're using it in the opposite direction, saying, oh, that's bad for Bitcoin. So it's very disappointing, and this is kind of like all the politics that you have to deal with. Like, you spend so much time, like if someone accuses you of something that you didn't do, it's so hard to defend yourself, right? Like, it's so hard to prove a negative, right? Like, you can prove you cheated on an exam, but it's impossible for you to prove that you didn't cheat on an exam, right? Like if you're accused of cheating, like, how do you prove that? It's very difficult to prove that you didn't. It's very easy the other way around, right? You can always prove that you cheated. So these are the negatives that you have to deal with in the space, right? All right. Whoa, lots of hands went up. I think I saw a hand right here earlier, and then we'll go to the other side of the room.
If you like say that you recommend it's better to go on with this and buy some Bitcoin or get online.
Okay, so neither. Okay, so is a simple question. So the question was, if you're going to invest in Bitcoin, so before you invest in Bitcoin, you have to understand and believe in the technology and why you're doing it. Let's start there. Only invest the money you're willing to lose, second. And the question was whether you should buy from Coinbase or go and mine it. So the only reason you go and mine it is if you have some kind of an advantage, which you may or may not. It depends on how creative you are. Now, everyone's mining. Now, I run one miner mostly as a hobby. And my miner has a huge advantage because I happen to be running it on a property that socializes the electricity bill across the whole complex. So I'm not paying an electric bill for my one miner. Now, as long as I'm running one miner, no one is probably going to notice. But if I decide to put 3 or 4 miners on there, I may definitely have to deal with the complex management. And I'll probably have the rules changed for the entire community. So if you have some kind of a mining advantage, then sure, you can go and do that. Otherwise, it's probably a losing effort unless you get lucky. Unless you happen to receive your miners at a perfect time at a low price of Bitcoin, and then boom, you catch this run up from $1,000 to $20,000, right? So you have to get very lucky. Buying it from Coinbase has its own disadvantages. Yes, it's easy to buy from there, and yes, it's cheap commissions. But the thing is, like I said earlier, that the importance of Bitcoin is that you can put your valuables in something that is unconfiscatable, is untrackable, by the current government. And buying them from Coinbase, you're not really using Bitcoin as cash on the internet. You're kind of using Bitcoin as a credit card, right? Because there's a financial record of how much you got when you got it, right? So sure, you can get the Bitcoin from Coinbase. You can immediately withdraw it back to your own wallet. But now you are responsible for storing that Bitcoin, right? So one of the problems is that if you're storing your own Bitcoin, yes, it's unconfiscatable, but if you can accidentally send it to a random person and now it's gone. Can't get it back. You can forget your password and it's gone. You can throw out your hard drive without making a backup and it's gone. Okay? So this is the problem with it. And this is the argument I always have when people try to use the concept of blockchain in all of these other industries. We should put medical records on the blockchain. We should put real estate on the blockchain. And my answer to them is, well, do you want the ability to accidentally transfer your property from yourself to your neighbor and there's nothing you can do about it? And if the answer is no, I don't want that property, then I tell them that you don't want Bitcoin on a blockchain, because that's what it does. The true use of a blockchain, like Bitcoin, it puts you in control of the digital asset. So you are fully responsible for it, and you have the accidental ability to delete it. So unless you want to accidentally delete your medical records permanently, you don't want those medical records on a blockchain. You just want them on a better database that it's easier for you to transfer from one doctor to another. So that's the innovation here, right? The true innovation of the blockchain is giving you this. It's known as bearer asset in the financial world. Back in the day, even government had bearer bonds. I know I'm gonna give away my age here, but how many of you saw like the first Die Hard movie with Bruce Willis? Go to the room, right? So that's actually what they were stealing. They were stealing bearer bonds, right? So back in the day, like 70s and 80s, the government had bearer bonds. There were government bonds, but they were not assigned to your name. So whoever is holding the paper owns these government bonds. And then they can send in these coupon payments every 6 months, and the government pays them an interest. And then when the time is up for the bond, they send in the whole bond and they get the $10,000 back or whatever the face value of the bond is. And they were nameless. So if someone steals this paper from you, they now own the bond. That concept went away because the government realized how it was easy. People were like using that to hide money from the government, and the government doesn't like that. They don't like it when you hide money from them, right? Now, I believe money is property, and you should be allowed to do with money whatever you like. So that's the big difference of opinion here. So that's kind of your own views on money. So buying it from Coinbase is okay to get your Bitcoin, but it slightly deviates from why Bitcoin exists, which is a way for you to own anonymous value. Okay, bunch of questions here. All right, let's go there. All right, you speak up a little bit. Mm-hmm. No. A, we don't consider it to be a problem. B, we're not actually addressing it. Here's why I personally don't consider it to be a problem, because I find it to be a very useful means of energy. I find fighter jets and warships to be a terrible use of energy waste. But I find the burning of electricity to give us the first non-government money to be a very good use of energy use. That's my personal view on it, right? As far as the technological view, I think that this hunt for the cheapest and most efficient form of electricity for the purposes of mining Bitcoin will revolutionize our electricity usage and gathering. I think if anything can lead to more free and reusable sources of energy, it would be this hunt for searching for Bitcoin. People are going to really start to innovate here. Who's the first one to put some satellites in space to collect direct solar electricity and somehow beam it down? I mean, Maybe I'm a little, futuristic here in thinking that, wow, if Bitcoin gets so efficient at electricity that some of these future giant Bitcoin mining farms will be so efficient at gathering electricity that they'll power, the neighborhood virtually for free with, just, from the extra waste electricity that they're gathering in order to, keep the pitchforks of the community off of them. So like these giant mining farms in your neighborhood will provide free electricity for the people that live near them. So I can see that, I can see huge innovation happening because of this. That's kind of how I see it. All right, let's go down, then we'll go back up.
So you said you don't like any of the altcoins. You mentioned Silk Road. You don't think there's any merit in some of the decentralized marketplaces?
Well, a decentralized marketplace doesn't necessarily need its own altcoin of the currency, right? Like a decentralized marketplace can still utilize Bitcoin as the currency, right? So you don't necessarily need to create your own currency for your own marketplace, because otherwise, and especially one that's as volatile as an altcoin, because an altcoin is always more volatile than Bitcoin. And so it's kind of like saying, hey, how come Amazon isn't charging us an Amazon stock as opposed to US dollars? So that's kind of how I see it.
Well, I guess I meant privacy also. Fully autonomous private marketplace.
I'm expecting Bitcoin to have that privacy. Once Bitcoin gets its second layer scaling solutions, I can foresee these, decentralized gray markets running their own Lightning nodes, and they'll be trusted to provide that privacy. They can open source that privacy. They can mix things inside the Lightning nodes. So I can certainly see more privacy as a second layer on top of Bitcoin. I find it problematic when you have privacy on the protocol itself, because it's hard to see what is actually going on there. So some of the privacy coins like Monero are very, very difficult to program because of all that privacy. That's why everyone is struggling with a wallet system and having a mobile wallet. When things are too private, like Zcash is having the same problem. It's like you ask the founder of Zcash, hey, how do you know someone isn't like secretly mining a bunch of Zcash and you don't know about it? And the answer is, well, we don't really know. So like a lot of problems come when you don't know what's going on under the hood. All right, so how much time do I have? Do you want to?
Like my class time, it's over. If you have a lot of questions, if people want to, if you have questions, stay. Or if you want to hear the responses, stay. And if not, you have 2 handouts. Pick up. Make sure you pick up on your way out. If you're from like 289 class. I think about half of the classes and half for.
But I didn't want to take up all your time, Professor.
Oh, no. That's fine.
Sure. I got I can answer a few more questions. So I mean, I'm not in a huge rush. So go ahead, finish up.
Okay, so what's your opinion on? Do you think there's an overhang right now in the market with the whole finance, and if it does come out that someone propping it up, that drives?
Honestly, I think the price of Bitcoin has fallen a lot already. So if anything else happens with those exchanges, I think a lot of it is already somewhat priced in. Like, I think if the market falls further, it's not really going to be because of that. So I think a lot of that fall is priced in. All right, let's go there, then we'll come back this way.
My dad's not calling the positive things like for example, like if inflation happens, they can raise interest rates, and like when the financial crisis in 2008 happened, they bought more securities or whatever. Like, how come, like, or what would be Bitcoin's solution for inflation or for like a big market crash?
Well, that's the thing, right? We don't know. This is the experiment, right? This is not only a technological experiment; it's an economic experiment. This is the true fintech. And if there was some kind of a centralized entity, then this isn't revolutionary. So the point is, the fact that there is no one in charge, let's see what it can do. Now, I believe that eventually, eventually another generation or two, there might be a push for some kind of if Bitcoin continues to be dominant as the currency of the world, it's not even close to there yet, but if it becomes dominant as the currency of the world, and then there are these catastrophic 1929 style global economic collapses, there could be a push to creating one of these centralized entities for Bitcoin. Can that happen, in 20, 30 years? Possible. We'll deal with it then. But for now, having any kind of centralization in Bitcoin right now would completely kill its speculative value.
Do you think governments will create their own blockchains in order to just like?
Well, they wouldn't be blockchains because they wouldn't be able to be decentralized, right? So that's the trick, right? To me, it's not a blockchain unless it has this mining that creates decentralization. And there's no way a government entity would do that. So whatever the government's going to create, it's not going to be a blockchain in my eyes. It's just going to be the elimination of cash. The government already has digital currency. 95% of all of the dollars in the world are digital. Only 5% is physical cash. They eliminate that 5% physical cash and hire a few better database developers, and boom, you have your altcoin to Bitcoin. But it's not going to be decentralized. And they have no interest of doing that. And like Venezuela is the first one to try it, and it's not going to be decentralized. Be controlled by the government. It's literally like the US dollar without the 5% of the physical cash. All right, let's go here. No, I don't know.
So there can that prices could go up. So like maybe 5 years. Do you think that's true? And then also, do you think like in the future Bitcoin might possibly become
Well, the price in the next 5 years needs to be a lot higher than 20,000 because we already hit 20,000 a few months ago per Bitcoin. So it has to be higher. Because Bitcoin is finite and the demand for Bitcoin is just getting started, one Bitcoin has to be way more valuable in order to become that global currency, a lot more valuable. And the Bitcoin will continue to increase in price as long as confidence of the Bitcoin network staying decentralized and staying secure remains. Like, for example, in the last 10 years, have you ever heard anything about the internet going down? Not your, not your router or modem going down, not your, ISP provider having issues. The internet itself, never, right? Internet's always working. Well, there's some censorship, sure. And there's always ways around that censorship. They're just clunky and slow and annoying, which is what decentralization is. Decentralization is clunky, slow, annoying, and when you have to use it, you're going to use it. And that's what Bitcoin is, right? It's not the fastest thing. It's not the cheapest thing, but it's decentralized. And it's the only one that's actually decentralized. And when you have to make a Bitcoin payment, you will, no matter how much it costs, no matter how slow it is. So as that gets improved, as there's more confidence in the technology of Bitcoin, like Bitcoin also doesn't go down. Yeah, it gets a little slow, and yes, it gets a little expensive, but it doesn't go down. There's no bugs. There's no bug in the internet. There was some bugs in the internet that they had to fix. There was maybe like a few years ago. They had to there was a huge moratorium. There was like some kind of really big bug in the underlying protocol of the internet where anybody's computer could get hacked because of a bug in the underlying layer of the internet, and like some big computer scientist guy found it, had to inform the internet, I don't even know who these people are. You don't know who they are because they're probably they try to stay under the radar because they're probably global, kidnap targets as well. If you understand the inner workings of the internet itself, and that community was informed, and they spent 3 months, maintaining complete silence on this vulnerability of the internet until they actually fixed it, and no one knew this was happening. Same thing with Bitcoin. The longer Bitcoin just works, where people have more and more confidence, more and more people are going to use it, and the value of Bitcoin will continue to go up. Also, as more and more mining comes online, it becomes more and more valuable. It becomes stronger. So yes, I am expecting value on chain, which is the common term for it, to rise, which means each Bitcoin is going to be worth a lot more. Can it lead to a global currency? Maybe. It will still need competition. I'm expecting there to still be local currencies with Bitcoin kind of keeping them in check. My favorite use for Bitcoin in the future will be, of course, because Bitcoin is not totally anonymous on chain. Again, I like my government to do the least amount of intervention, and I want them to be as honest as possible, which is very, very difficult to achieve. But one of the things that can make the government more honest is transparency in tax revenue and transparency in government spending. And that is something I foresee maybe one day, all government revenue and all government expenses running through the Bitcoin blockchain in a transparent way, where any second-year computer science major can go and audit the government's bank account through the blockchain. So that's one great use that I see in the future. All right, let's go here.
Should we pay taxes on Bitcoin?
You should, but the beauty of it is.
But why though? They're not warranted. In my personal view, they're not warranted at all because no one's representing Bitcoin.
Well, that's not how it works exactly, right? So according to the government, you owe taxes any time you earn money, right? So
How do you determine that, though? Like, who determines what you owe?
But the law applies universally to all assets. Like just because Bitcoin came along, it doesn't change that, right? So for example, if you bought, let's say, a used car for $3,000 and then left it in your garage, and then all of a sudden discovered that this car suddenly became a classic, and now you bought it for $3,000, it sat in your garage for 10 years, all of a sudden you can sell it for $30,000, you owe taxes on that difference because you made money, okay? Also, if someone just gifts you a car for $20,000, you owe taxes on that. This is the problem in a lot of these game shows. Like all of these game shows, The Price is Right, when you get these like lavish gifts, all of a sudden you come home, you get a letter from the IRS, hey, you just won a $50,000 car. Congratulations, you owe us 10 grand. So that applies universally to, I don't even want to say assets, to basically anything, right? Same thing with income. If you're making money, if somebody paid you and like if you did a job and somebody owes you $2,000 for that job, but instead of giving you $2,000, they gave you a cow. That's you take it the market value of the cow, how much the cow is worth. Oh, the cow is worth about $2 grand. I have no idea how much a cow is worth. I'm just making it up here. But so if they paid you in a cow, it's like they paid you in dollars. You still owe income tax from that, right? Now, the slight difference with Bitcoin is like cash. If someone paid you in cash, there's no record for the government to know you got paid in cash. So the burden is on you to voluntarily pay that tax or potentially face consequences, but it's much harder for them to get you on a cash payment. So Bitcoin brings that element back into the equation where it's up to you to decide if you want to do it, but if you don't do it, you're technically breaking the law. Or not technically, you're breaking the law. But you're breaking a civil law, not a criminal law. Like this stuff gets complicated, right? Like money laundering is a crime specific to earning money from illicit activity. Now, it doesn't matter how you earn that money. So I don't believe you can be accused of money laundering if you earned cash or Bitcoin from legal work. Only if you use illegal work. But you definitely want to check with your accountants and your lawyers in that situation. But yes, but again, this is what I think. I think the government should, I think the tax burden should be absolutely minimal. And lots of countries are doing very minimal taxes and they're seeing huge economic activity. Let's move across the room here. I know you had a question.
About taxes. So since blockchain is global and is not like residing in one country, it's on the internet, who says that I should pay taxes to the US or to my country of citizenship?
Well, your country of citizenship says, right? Like, if you don't like it, go get a different passport, right? That's the.
Or let's say if I use Binance, which is Chinese, who says to which country I should pay?
Well,
Taxes?
your jurisdiction does, right? Again.
I think what he's getting at is there's no representation for us. That's the one thing. Like, you don't see any lobbying. You don't see any, like, yeah, there might be some hearings in Congress.
Well, there are, right? Again, this is the.
Not only that, no, I'm saying it's a location for since it's on the internet, it's global. Who says to which country should I owe taxes?
Exactly. So we need more representation. That's the problem. There's not enough work on this.
But again, that's irrelevant to some countries over others, right? Like, for example, the U.S. taxes U.S. citizens on global income. Like, U.S. doesn't care where you work. They want their cut unless you're paying taxes to another jurisdiction. I ran into this problem. One of my co-workers from Bear Stearns ended up, he was a Canadian citizen, not a U.S. citizen, even though he was working in the U.S. for a while. He left and ended up getting a job in Bermuda. Now, Bermuda does not charge any income taxes. He's a Canadian resident, and Canada says you pay income tax only if you're earning income in Canada. So a Canadian resident going to work in Bermuda that does not charge income tax, he gets to keep his whole paycheck. If I go and join him at his job, Bermuda doesn't charge me any taxes, but the US will charge me as if I'm working in the US border, because US charges globally. Other countries don't do that, right? So if you have a passport from a country that does not charge you on global income, as long as you don't reside in that country as you're collecting Bitcoin payments, you can probably get away with not paying any taxes. But it's basically the country of your passport gets to decide that. And yes, Bitcoin doesn't have any representation, and that goes back to the decentralized nature of Bitcoin. Now again, the drawback is, you're right, there is no representation of Bitcoin to the government. But on the flip side, because it's decentralized, there's nobody in control, so you can feel safe in putting your money in Bitcoin and knowing that there's nobody in charge that can confiscate it one day. Okay, I want to go over to that side. You had a question? I'm sorry, you bought what? $20. Okay. Well, it's up to you, right? I mean, you're right. You could spend it there. There's many other places you can spend it. I mean, Expedia accepts it for hotel reservations. There are many other things. Now, again, I only earn my income in Bitcoin. It's the only currency that I accept for my services. I actually, unless I happen to be in person, I'll accept cash or a Bitcoin. I prefer Bitcoin. So in my case, I have to, sell that Bitcoin in order to pay my bills. But you're right. Bitcoin is not very used these days, and most people use it for speculation until one day it becomes more widely used. I come from the perspective that you should only use Bitcoin in cases of censorship. So if you wanted to give a donation to WikiLeaks, if you wanted to, I know, is gambling legal in Maryland? It is, right? But it's at a casino, right? When I first got in, again, I went to FSU. We used to be in the same conference, not anymore. I went to FSU, and I remember when I got in 2013, one of the things I really wanted to do with Bitcoin was put bets on FSU football games. It was one of the drivers that got me into Bitcoin. Now, after I lost about a third of a Bitcoin on the FSU Clemson game in 2013, even though FSU won, they didn't cover the spread. And then Bitcoin shoots up in price. I realized, oh my God, what am I doing? This is like, I should be holding this thing, not gambling it away. But that's a use case, right? Because I was in New York and I had no means of placing a bet on that game on the internet. It was very difficult. I'd have to, go to a Western Union, like wire cash to some company. Bitcoin made it so simple, right? So there are use cases, but most of them are still in this gray market area for now. There are a few use cases without, but I wouldn't use my Bitcoin on Overstock.com. I'd go to Amazon and use an Amazon credit card. And I'd hold on to that Bitcoin as an investment for now until more of the world is actually using it day to day. And even then, I will be very selective in how I spend it. Like I've regretted many payments from the early days, especially when Bitcoin was at like $300 range. Regretted many of the things I wasted Bitcoin on instead of just using other forms of payment. All right, let's go over there. Let's go here and there.
So in the future, do you see it more as a store of value?
I would like to see it as both, but historically, there's always been a challenge with both, right? I mean, we have the gold standard. It's a great store of value, and it's going to be a currency, and then all of a sudden, it's not a very good currency. You go to the fiat system. It's a great currency. It's a terrible store of value, right? So it's very, very difficult to do both. Can Bitcoin be the first global store of value and currency? We'll find out, right? We haven't had that yet. These systems always, one or the other always breaks. Can we have both? It'll be interesting. Follow?
Don't they kind of the store of value more expensive? Like
Yes and no. Some of the biggest spending in Bitcoin took place when the value of a Bitcoin was very high. Lots of people were spending Bitcoin at the end of 2013 when the price got to 1,300. Lots of people were spending Bitcoin when the price was getting to 20,000. I personally know a few people that actually bought houses when Bitcoin was going up to that $15,000, $20,000 range. Just met one in LA the other day. He was telling me, and then like his wife was yelling at him. He's like, "Oh, you should have waited, another month and got it for 20,000." He's like, but it seems that there's more economic activity when the value goes up because people are richer, right? Like sooner or later, you're gonna want to spend it, right? You're not gonna be rich and still driving a 15-year-old car. I mean, Warren Buffett does. I probably will, but most people won't, right? All right. You know what? Let me just go there real quick. Then we'll follow up. Yeah.
How do we get? And when you think about it logically, it's so strange because there's nothing more forward-thinking and creative than Bitcoin, than cryptos. And when you look at some of the, first of all, I found Bitcoin about a year ago, and I was absolutely sucked in. It's fascinating. I probably watched 95% of all your videos.
Oh, thank you.
So you can ask some questions, I'll give an answer. Nevertheless, and you hear about Elizabeth Stark, you hear about a few women, but there's so few. See the rich list that recently came out. Of course, there are no women there. And even if you don't like women, like if you look at some of the chats that goes on, there are time and time again you see something equivalent to keep women out. And if you go back to the question about supply and demand, if you want demand to go up, and imagine if the United States had 100 people in it, and you excluded 50%, you didn't invite them in, of course that would have an effect on price. You follow me? So the more people interested, the more people feeling welcome, of course, for logical, selfish reasons. You want that because the price will go up, and lots of people will be wealthy as a consequence.
All right. So the question was, how do we get more women into Bitcoin? Which is probably going to get me in trouble. But okay, so this is the general problem with STEM, right? I mean, this is what we've heard even before Bitcoin. There's not enough women in the engineering fields and the math fields. This is a general problem in science and math and engineering. So the problem is not new. And now, as far as I personally haven't seen any specific statements, keep women out, or in chat groups, you might have. But I also don't really pay too much attention to those chat groups, because what happens is, because there's not a lot of women in the field, these chat groups and all of these events are kind of dominated by men. And when they're dominated by men, again, you have this, bell curve with outliers. Some that are too nice and some that are complete jerks, right? So when you have this like big bell curve with the majority of men, you have to understand that the number of jerks will be a little bit higher than in other bell curves, right? So, I mean, I don't know what to say about that. There's nothing I can do to control that. Other than that, like, I don't think anything, like, I think forcing the issue will only make it worse. I mean, you can't, like, I don't think you can, like, cater to women and, you know, make something easier, because then it's all, I feel like it's almost like patronizing. So, like, I think it'll eventually just, like, solve itself out, or we just have to live with it the way we currently deal with the STEM field. I don't know, but again, women control most of the money in a household, and once more households are on Bitcoin, they will definitely have a say in how that Bitcoin is being spent. But other than that, like, I don't really have a good answer. I just don't. I know we have here, and then we'll go there.
Thank you. One of the reasons why I'm a big fan of crypto and blockchain is, you know, just like Dan Larimer's philosophy, protection of life, liberty, and property, which I see similar to what you have here. So Dan, when I watched Dan Larimer's recently his commentary, one of the reasons why, you know, he's so into blockchain 3.0 EOS, his recent project, is that he believes blockchain, in order for blockchain to really add value to people, he said it must also scale. That's why he said, yeah, in this earlier conversation, Bitcoin can be store of value, can be a currency, but still hardly can ever scale. So that's why I'm thinking maybe there's room for alts where they are as secure, they are maybe proof of work and proof of stake combo, but yeah, if they can scale and still provide those benefits of you know, secured and decentralized and store of value, what do you?
Well, again, this is what, I mean, this is the hope, what segregated witness, the upgrade that was done to the code, and the Lightning network building on top now, it will bring us that scale. And we have the smartest people in the room building it, way smarter than Dan Larimer, right? Remember, Dan Larimer is the guy when in 2011, Satoshi personally said to him, if you still don't get it, I no longer have the time to explain it to you. That was said by Satoshi to Dan Larimer. So I trust in, like, there was like 300 people down the list of Bitcoin developers that I would put way ahead of Dan Larimer. So if anyone solves this problem, it's not going to be him with his alternate blockchains that he keeps hopping from one to the other, which none of which I think actually do anything. So well, let's hope. Let's hope Lightning gives us that scale where Bitcoin can be both a usable currency and a store of value. All right, let's go back down here. Go across.
Appreciate being able to attend your It's been a while since I've talked to you. Thanks for opening it to the public. Anybody wants power Bitcoin? Get you over the hump and get started.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. All right, let's go across. Yes. Well, I think Bitcoin was probably a little undervalued for a big portion of the time in 2016. Now in 2017, I think it went up a little bit too much. Now it's actually harder to explain the move from 1,000 to 7,000. I thought that was somewhat stable. Now the move from 7,000 to 20,000, I believe that was just a speculation on Wall Street and the CME futures coming in. And now we're seeing that it was all hype and it's coming back down. So if we've reversed from 6,000 and now we're going back up, then that shows that that whole bubble from 7,000 to 20 was simply hype on Wall Street getting in when they're really not making that much of a difference. Other than that, again, it's a scarce resource. that's becoming more and more useful every day. And more importantly, confidence. Your currency is all about the confidence. US dollar is the most useful currency throughout the world because of global confidence that while we all hate the US corruption in the government and the Federal Reserve, it's still the most trusted government globally, the most responsible government globally, and the most trusted and responsible Federal Reserve globally. Little countries don't count, okay? So it's confidence in your fiat currency that gives it value. Blockchains and Bitcoin is no different. The more people are confident that Bitcoin isn't going anywhere, the more value Bitcoin is going to attract from people. We'll just go across there.
I was curious about thoughts of pushing out in Bitcoins and that any effect on mass adoption.
500 to 1 million Bitcoin. Now, I don't really think about that much. The only thing that worries me in that regard is not Satoshi Nakamoto himself, right? Because for all we know, and speculation is Satoshi Nakamoto has already died. Also, we don't know if it's a group of people, one person, if it's a group of people, and because like Hal Finney was one of the people that was suspected to be Satoshi, and he died. There was another guy down in Florida, and he's no longer with us either. I'm not going to get into that story. I got to do that on a podcast, actually. And what worries me is if someone else that knew or they were working together and someone else has those private keys and is trying to decrypt them. So Satoshi himself doesn't scare me because I think that the last thing he would want to do is disrupt the Bitcoin system in any way. Even if it goes against his beliefs, he left it to the community, and that's what the community decided. Even if the real Satoshi hates what's happening to it, he has to leave it alone because he has to understand that you gotta let this thing play out, and maybe the world wasn't ready for it, right? But the one thing that worries me is if someone cracks those keys, maybe the quantum computers will come, right? That's the fear, that the encryption isn't strong enough for quantum computers, though in that case, your nuclear arsenal is also not safe under quantum computers. So encryption will need to be raised, but if someone does have those keys and can decrypt them, that person could cause some damage. So if Satoshi is still around, what I would love to see him do, and again, it will be difficult without full privacy, is to, again, my perfect world would be Satoshi saying, hey, I want to put my 500,000 to 1 million coins back in circulation. And I want to do it in the most undisruptive way possible. So one of the things he can do is he can add them back to the mining reward on the back end. So when we get to only 1 Bitcoin per block, let's make it 1.5. Let's add it to the back end. Or he can start like slowly donating it to like random organizations in very small quantities, like slowly put that currency in circulation in the least disruptive way, not to skew the economics. So that's what I would love to see happen. All right, let's move on.
So my question is kind of related to that. My question is, what if everybody adopted Bitcoin, right? And wouldn't that create like crazy vast like inequality, like greater than we already have? Like the people like you and the people that bought onto Bitcoin really early would just get ridiculously rich, and everyone that like hopped on late is just like screwed.
Maybe, maybe not, right? I mean, my view on it is the following. And I just did an interview with this podcast. Mind the Machine. And we talked about that, where the interviewer was telling me how great Bitcoin is for the unbanked. And my answer was, well, helping the unbanked is number 3 on my list of things Bitcoin should achieve. And as unsensitive as that sounds, my reality of the situation is the government doesn't really create jobs. Government doesn't create economic activity. Government takes from productive people taxes and then uses that money. Some of it, a small percentage of it goes to good things. The majority of it goes to bad things like war. So to me, an entrepreneur getting rich would help the unbanked significantly more than directly helping the unbanked. Okay, so for me, the number one use case for Bitcoin is that person that worked his whole life and earned money to keep that money away from governments that want to confiscate that money. Also, if that entrepreneur can take his valued money and move to another country where he can spend that money, that entrepreneur is going to create jobs. He's going to invent new technology that helps the poor. Like the internet helps the poor a lot. Okay, I know not all of them are on the internet, but there's lots of entrepreneurs that are trying to get everybody on the internet, and they're doing it. So I foresee this new batch of wealth in those that got into Bitcoin early doing more with that money to help the unbanked than any kind of government that distributes those funds. Correct. I have no problem with that at all. Go across.
So I remember vividly that NYA and the user-activated soft fork and SegWit back last July, and then we finally got it, but the industry and the space just kind of dragged its feet, and we had really slow adoption. Some still haven't adopted. What are your feelings on Lightning? Are we going to see a repeat with Lightning, or how's it going to be different?
Oh yeah, no, because it's going to be different because it doesn't require another code change. That was the code change. So we needed the SegWit code change in order, and now anyone can start their Lightning channels. And yes, some of the bigger companies that are using Bitcoin have not yet adopted the Lightning, the segregated witness, which helps make transactions faster and cheaper. But finally, they're starting to get the idea that they have no choice. So I think the ball is about to start rolling on that end, and there's going to be big differences there. So I think we're on a really good path. All right, you haven't asked the question yet. Go. I'm sorry, the what? Tether. Okay, that's fine.
A lot of people think that the reason why Bitcoin from 7,000 Tether was
being printed. Yeah. It's possible. For those of you that don't know Tether, so I don't like Tether. So Tether is a digital representation of a US dollar. And one company kind of owns Tether. So supposedly they have a bunch of money sitting in a bank somewhere. We're speculating that these banks are in Taiwan. And they have like over $1 billion there now. And each of those dollars represents a digital token known as Tether. So it's a one-to-one, fully backed digital token by $1 of US dollars. And this digital token trades anonymously on exchanges, and it's mostly used in exchanges that don't really have bank accounts for their users. So if you want to trade Bitcoin against the US dollar, but your exchange doesn't have a banking license for you, you can trade it against this digital anonymous asset that is banked by the dollar. So there's two speculations there. One, is the money actually there? So the big, I don't want to call it conspiracy because we don't know. So no one really knows if every single dollar is backed, if every single Tether is backed by $1 at the bank. So we don't know if they're printing these Tethers out of thin air. And the speculation is that these Tethers are being printed and they're used to prop up Bitcoin. Now, if that was true, then why did we just fall 70% in price, right? That's one thing. The other thing is, even if those dollars are there at the bank somewhere in Taiwan, this scares me because now it's going to be kind of big. And what exactly is stopping the US government from showing up and confiscating those dollars? This was the problem with something called e-gold from the 1990s, where there was a digital representation of a gram of gold that you can trade anonymously until the government showed up and confiscated the gold and arrested the people responsible for maintaining that system. So either way, I think Tether is in trouble. What can that do if Tether collapses? Well, I believe Tether is way more important to the survival of altcoins than it is for Bitcoin. So I think if Tether does go belly up, there could be lots of I think there could be lots of pressure of altcoins going into Bitcoin because now they don't have Tether to trade against. So I don't know if it's going to be good or bad for Bitcoin if something happens to Tether. We'll have to wait and see till something gives. Let's go here, then there.
Just a question regarding ETFs.
Mhm.
I know that Winklevoss twins and several others are trying so far, no luck. When it does happen, and when do you think it will happen? Do you think it will have a great impact on the value of the price?
Good question. So I think that the ETF is now a lot more likely to happen now that we have the futures. So the ETF is more likely. Now, the Winklevoss getting that ETF is a lot less likely because one of the problems that the SEC had with the Winklevoss twins Bitcoin ETF is that the Winklevoss brothers were going to have to be responsible for the security of the underlying Bitcoin, the maintenance of the price stability of the ETF, and the exchange that is being used, right? So they were going to have way too much control over the ETF, right? These things need to be right. These things need to be completely separated. So ProShares, which is an ETF company that makes lots of ETFs, and they've been around for a while and trusted, I think they would be the most likely organization to get that ETF out. I think it's coming eventually, but there is lots of problems there, right? Because the difference between ETF and any other commodity is that Bitcoin security really is like nuclear science, right? So if you have a Bitcoin ETF, someone has to be responsible for the security of that Bitcoin that's going to be hacked, or people are going to try to hack it. And the bigger that pool of Bitcoin grows, the more dangerous this honeypot gets. Not to mention a potential government confiscation of that Bitcoin as well, because it's a bearer asset, it's a scarce asset. So there's lots to consider. This is why the CME futures are not physical delivery of the Bitcoin like the gold CME futures. It's just cash settled like the S&P 500 futures. So we'll see. I still think it's a few years away, but you never know. You never know. So I think that when the ETF comes, it should be kind of good for Bitcoin. But remember, if people are buying into the ETF, they're taking Bitcoin out of circulation, and they're storing it for the purposes of the ETF. So that could have enormous effects on the price of Bitcoin going up because Bitcoin is being withdrawn from commerce. Yeah.
Are you as bullish as John McAfee on Bitcoin?
I mean, overall, yes, not the timeline. Yeah, Bitcoin is very hard to predict. I mean, we can end this year at 100,000. We can end this year at 3,000, right? I just try to guide people with my technical analysis on the price of Bitcoin, and I try to do daily videos now because the picture changes day by day. But I think last two questions, and then we should probably get going.
Personally, Tone, thanks for coming to my alma mater. Started cryptocurrencies probably like in September-ish or so. Your videos and things have been required watching prior to you. But with that being said, I was reading something maybe a couple of weeks, 2 weeks or so, maybe a month ago, by a gentleman. I can't remember his name, but he did basically an article about countries that are developing countries and tying their currencies to Bitcoin or something. So I want to know a little bit your thoughts about that. What do you think about that? I'm too early for that, but
sure. Tying your currency, your government currency to Bitcoin. I mean, I think Bitcoin is way too volatile for any country to do that. Now, if you want to add some, as a country, if you want to add some Bitcoin into your, currency reserve portfolio, into your sovereign wealth fund portfolio, I think that's a great thing, right? If you want to have some underlying value, like some countries have natural resources, to back them up. Though historically, I mean, only like Saudi Arabia and some of the other Middle East countries are the only ones that are able to thrive off of their natural resources. Most of the other countries, because the government is in control of those natural resources, it all goes to complete shit. I mean, look at Venezuela, look at Russia, countries with immense natural resources, Africa, immense natural resources. And when a government owns it, it kind of goes to hell. I mean, perhaps one of the good things that came out of the Middle East, having all these natural resources, and actually, I'm not going to talk about their political or their cultural system, but as far as like, look at Dubai, look at some of the other countries, is the fact that, well, maybe a few families in control is more responsible than, a socialist style government in control, right? And it's the countries, I mean, US is kind of in between. US has a lot of natural resources, but they don't rely on them that much. And like Japan doesn't have many natural resources at all. And look how much they've thrived. South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore. Like, your country will thrive based on the productive capacity of its people. That was the work of Adam Smith. And, wealth of nations. Why do nations get rich? And it's the productive capacity of its people, not the natural resources of the country, that's going to drive your economic activity. So you don't really need to back your currency against Bitcoin, and you don't want to. You want to create a capitalistic environment with the least amount of restrictions on the people, and the lowest amount of taxes, and the least amount of government intervention, and let your currency do its own thing. But should the Federal Reserves, start thinking about having, Bitcoin on reserve like they used to have gold? The answer is yes, but you shouldn't peg any currency to it. It'll strengthen your currency by the confidence that the people will show in your government, whether people of that government or other governments, that the government is being responsible in them building wealth for their people. Back there, last question somewhere, or somebody had it. All right.
So right now, Bitcoin is sort of synonymous.
Oh, no, you got to speak up.
Okay. So Bitcoin is sort of synonymous with, it's highly speculative. Which is, I think, kind of a shame. But what needs to happen in philosophically and also technically for you to be able to walk into, say, Starbucks and flash my phone and be able to actually purchase things like cash?
I mean, it's already happening now, right? Like, most of Japan is accepting Bitcoin. It's, I mean, it'll tie into your point of sale machine, right? Like any business you walk into, like they have this machine, right? So it's up to those machine operators to integrate Bitcoin. And in Japan, Bitcoin was declared a currency, a usable currency. So most of these machine operators of point of sale machines, they integrated Bitcoin right in there. Now, very few people are going in there to actually pay with Bitcoin, right? The problem isn't accepting Bitcoin. That's going to be up to the government of that country to say, sure, you can use Bitcoin, right? Now, we all think we're innocent until proven guilty. The reality is not, it's not simple. It's a little more complicated than that. So until Bitcoin is actually stated by the government that it's, you're not going to get in trouble for accepting it, you're not going to get in trouble for using it, then these point of sale machines are going to start using it. Now, Bitcoin debit cards are out, like the Shift card's very popular. I'm looking for something a little more anonymous for my personal use, but just because, again, I want to use Bitcoin the way it was meant to be used, outside of the oversight of the government. And but the idea on that is, once again, is just time. It's time. And also, right now, spending it on a cup of coffee is probably not good. You need more value on chain, and you need that second layer scaling solutions where every transaction is pretty much free and very, very quick. So we're not ready for it yet technologically. Probably need about 6 to 12 more months. And then, again, 6 to 12 more months should bring more confidence if Bitcoin underlying layer remains, without any downtime, and more value on chain, right? So when the value of one Bitcoin is $50,000 and the price of one Bitcoin changes by $2,000 in a day, the price of your cup of coffee doesn't change because it's too small to register on that, right? The price of your coffee might change by a penny in that case, right? So we need more value on chain so those little transactions are not affected by Bitcoin's price volatility. You need integrated into point of sale machines, and you do need government saying that business is not going to get shut down, right? This is the problem the marijuana industry has right now in Colorado, right? And probably here in DC, where sure, marijuana is legal, great, but it's illegal federally. So these companies have no banking. So you go to them and say, why are you buying these giant safes and storing all these mountains of cash, and now you got to hire security to guard that cash? Why don't you just put it all into Bitcoin? And the answer is, well, we don't want to potentially break two laws. We don't want to lose our marijuana business because the government comes in and says, oh, you're using Bitcoin, now you're done, right? It's like what got Al Capone, right? He didn't get arrested for selling alcohol, he got arrested for tax evasion, right? So you really want to only potentially break one law at a time. So you don't want to lose your core business by doing something else, right? So this becomes that little problem. Like, why would a profitable business take a chance on accepting Bitcoin only to find out 6 months later their business just became in jeopardy? So you do need that potential government approval, unfortunately. They're talking about it. Government works slow. All right, guys. Thank you.
Very quickly, long tradition, giving speakers gifts.
Oh, wow.
Sitting here with this University of Maryland mouse pad.
Oh, thank
small
you.
token of our appreciation for coming. And thank you again.
Thank you. All right, guys. Hope the live stream went well. I think I saw it like freezing up. All right, can I just get like a word that everything went well with the live stream in the live comments before I shut this down?
Can I get a selfie with you?
Yeah, of course.
Hey, there we go.
Give me like 1 second.
It's so popular. So.
Can we move that over? There we go. Oh, man.
I feel like I listened to Andreas and Antonopoulos too today.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Andreas is great.
Yeah, he is.
Solomon Andreas.
Maybe the video wasn't all that great, but the audio was good. Oh, some people are saying all good. All right, cool. All right, guys. I will see you all on my next podcast, probably tomorrow morning. All right. Thanks for watching.